Okay, I have never been so excited to do a video. I've been wanting to do this video for so long. I can't believe it's finally here that I actually get to do this. If anybody's ever seen any of my other videos, you'll you'll be able to tell that I'm pretty rough around the edges. And yeah, without question, I know I am. But Jesus knows that I'm rough around the edges. He knows everything about me. He knows why I'm rough around the edges. But He still loves me, and I'm crazy about Him. And my fear of Him and my fear of God keeps me out of a lot of trouble I would normally get in. So, yeah, and I'm not perfect. I know I'm not perfect, but Jesus is, and that's why I need Him. But this is something that's I'm very, very passionate about, is about my faith and stuff like that. But interesting thing is, okay, like in the Bible, there's a story about doubting Thomas. Like the other disciples saw when after Jesus rose from the dead, they were going around telling the other disciples, but Thomas didn't believe it. He was like, unless I see Him, put my hands in His side and put my hands in His nails, I'm not going to believe it. And then one day Jesus appeared to all of them, and He went up to Thomas and said, here's my side, here's my hand. Stop doubting and believe. And, He fell on His knees, my Lord, my God. And He said, blessed are you because you've seen and you believe, but blessed more are those who have not yet seen and still believe. Did you catch what He said? He didn't say that it was bad that you saw and you believed. But He said it was better if you have not seen and still believe. But He didn't say you couldn't see and believe. And even the definition of faith in the Bible is, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And that's what this video is going to be about. I have done a lot of study about science in the Bible. I could go on about this subject for like ever, but I want to show some of the most, I want to have this one condensed into some of the most fascinating things, of things that you can actually see, you can actually go to, and some things you can actually put your hand on and see. The stories in the Bible are packed up, and the evidence. And that's the thing. There's also a verse in the Bible that says, truth stands the test of time, lies are soon exposed, because truth always has evidence to back it up. And that's what I'm so fascinated about. But let's just jump right into this as fast, because there's a lot of things I want to cover, and I could talk about each one of these subjects for like ever. I'm going to try to keep this condensed, because I just want to show it to everybody in one place, and people are more interested in each of these individuals. All this, you could go research this information and just dive into it for like days, weeks, months, years. I mean, I've done it. I've done it for years and years. I love this kind of stuff. But the first thing that most people don't know is, do y'all realize that Noah's Ark has been found? Yes, it has. And right here it is. You're looking at Noah's Ark landing in the spot in a valley near the mountains that it says in the Bible it landed. Ron Wyatt is the one who's responsible for finding that and finding the line. He's like the real life Indiana Jones. But here is Noah's Ark. You can see the side where the rivets are. They've done it's the exact measurements in the Bibles. It says it is. And it's a national park. I'm pretty sure this is in Turkey. You could go and see this place. It is Noah's Ark National Park. Or whatever, reserve or whatever. But you can go and visit this place. You could go see the real Noah's Ark. They've done tests on it. That's petrified wood. Here's the anchors that are below it in the town. Here's an overhead view of it. And yeah, they've even drilled into it and pulled out cat hair and petrified animal dung from inside of it. Yeah, this is the real Noah's Ark in the spot it says it landed in the Bible. and it's in the Valley of the Eight. The valley that it's in is called the Valley of the Eight. So yeah, it's just it's fascinating. And Ron and Maya did all this, and they did. Here's where they did metal detectors and found where the rivets are, which the rivets and the nails have aluminum in it, which is not found in nature. This is actually man-made, proven man-made. They did sonar scans on it, and Ron Wyatt even did a model of it. Here, watch this.
In August of 1985, the Wyatt expedition receives the necessary government permits to perform the radar examinations. The results are staggering. Massive keelsons, deck timbers, open chambers, and other nautical configurations appear before their eyes, telling the story of what specialists believe to be the remains of an enormous, ancient, man-made ship.
Basically, the radar scans show the same thing that the metal detector scans did, only with more detail. They show there's a pattern. They show there's a pattern of linear lines, there's a pattern of cross lines, and there's a pattern of even distribution to these lines in both directions. Now, that's precisely what you would expect out of the remains of a ship-type object, because you would have a keel, you would have parallel lines, which would be keelsons, and you would have the transverse lines, which would be bulkheads and other reinforcing of the ship.
Immediately after the earthquake, it was to measure the depth of the deposit or the remains of the boat along the length of the boat. At the point where the deposit thickened, it was at that point that the upper decks began. And we found that this was a three-tiered or three-decked boat. Now in 1985, 1986, and 87, we were able to measure this laterally also. This data, with the data that we got from the radar scan, allows us to know what the boat looked like and to be able to reproduce a model, scale model of that boat within very close tolerances of what it actually looked like. This is the best estimate of what Noah's Ark looked like. Now the deck portion of the boat shows up very clearly on the radar scans, and we have reproduced that here in the deck portion of the model. Now the boat itself is very unique internally as well as externally, and in this end we find the bracing to hold the hull out and to maintain its strength in a stormy sea. As you look up the boat here, you find that there's many chambers in here, which no doubt were the areas that the animals were kept in. Up near the front, we have a ramp system which allowed the animals and the people that occupied the boat to move from one level of the boat to the other. And this, of course, begins at...
So now that you're seeing Noah's Ark, and a lot of people don't know this unless you've done the research, the question could start popping up. Why isn't this mainstream media? What I want to challenge you in this video to start thinking outside the box, and there's some things that you should really start questioning yourself about. Because if you start looking at things like Noah's Ark, which is huge, because there's a lot of things that go into that, and scientifically back it up, but if Noah's Ark is true, and if all these stories in the Bible are true, and everything about the Bible is true, let's start looking at the Bible like, how about it all being true? And if it's all true, it talks about an invisible war going on, where you have things that we cannot see that are extremely real. God, Jesus, angels, Satan, demons, and it talks about these things in the Bible. Remember, there's a story in the Bible about a man going down a road on a donkey. There's an angel standing in front of him with a sword. the donkey sees it. He doesn't. And the donkey goes off the side of the road until God opens the guy's eyes and he sees the angels. And then there's two men in a field standing in front of an entire army that wants to attack these two men. One of them was a prophet, one of them was scared. And he's like, what are we going to do? The prophet turns, prays and says, open his eyes. The guy who's standing with him, his eyes are open and he's surrounded by angels with chariots of fire. Like, they're real. We just can't see them. And it's very clear about demons in the Bible that can get inside people's heads and manipulate them and can control them. So, it talks about in the Bible having invisible good guys and invisible bad guys. And they really do influence us. So, if that's true, who do you think would be in control of the media? The good guys or the bad guys? And which one of these two groups would not want something like Noah's Ark being plastered for everybody to see it? This is the things I want to start challenging you about. Or this is the things, not me, but this is the things that for yourself start thinking about. Now, Noah's Ark brings up so many fascinating subjects, like, and it's mathematically, like, right on point. Like, the population growth right now is at like 2% or something like that. So mathematically, if you took one couple, how long would it take to get to the population we have today? It would take, mathematically, it would take 1,100 years. But that's the thing, it has not always been at 2%, and if you started with like a couple, it would compound on itself. So if you keep that in mind and you figure in war, it would go between about 5,000 and 6,000 years, which is the exact same time that Noah walked off that ark with his sons and his daughter-in-laws. But what's interestingly enough is there's interesting facts about what the world was like before the flood and what happened with the flood, because there's things that just wouldn't make sense. Like if you look at a Brachiosaurus, look how tall he is. And the thing about it is Brachiosaurus nostrils are the same size as a horse. The oxygen levels today are not high enough for a Brachiosaurus to lift its head. It would be suffocating. And then you got humongous fossils of humongous dragonflies that what they do is with the wind, they take the proportion of wind and the oxygen to make themselves lift. That humongous dragonfly couldn't lift off the ground today because the oxygen levels aren't the way they should be. Which brings up a lot of fascinating questions. And not only that, Noah's Ark is not, the worldwide flood just isn't in the Bible. There is over 277 different cultures that have a worldwide flood story. And this is all over the world. Okay, one thing I always found fascinating is that in Genesis 1, when God's creating everything, and it's, let's see, where is this? Starting in chapter 6, God, it talks about there's this water, and he divides water from water, and he puts water in the sky, and he puts water on the ground, and he calls the water in the sky, he calls the upper sky, and then, well, he's saying the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. But he talks about dividing waters, and one is above and one is below. I always thought that was interesting of how that was worded, and it didn't make any sense to me. But let's just say, let's throw what I think I know out the window. So let's do, let's just take it at face value. It says there's water in the sky, and then there's water that's the oceans and stuff like that. That part's easy to understand. But what about that water in the sky? I was like, dang, I was like, okay, let's try to visualize this. If there's water in the sky, well, there is an ozone layer, and we know that clouds can form rain and stuff like that, but it sounded more like there was a water that separated. I was thinking, if there was water that was in the sky that was kind of like the ozone layer, and it was up there with the ozone layer, and it was stuck to that at that time, what that would do to the entire planet is when the sun would hit something like that, what it would do, it would encapsulate all that heat into the entire planet, and would make the entire Earth kind of like a greenhouse effect, warming the entire thing. And you got water that's in the top, and it talks about a mist that used to come up out of the ground because there was water under the ground. So that would produce extremely high oxygen levels, and with that kind of atmosphere, a person could run for miles and not get tired. If you cut yourself, you would heal like that, and vegetation would grow extremely crazy, and things would be able to grow in that type of environment. If you start thinking about, wait a minute, this is a different kind of environment, and we're living in a different kind of environment than what that was, because that's where the Garden of Eden came from. It was a paradise, and we're not living the same way, and you can see that in just ancient bones. Like an example, here is a ancient beaver head compared to a modern day beaver head. Here's an ancient crocodile compared to a modern day crocodile. Are you? Here's an ancient tortoise. Here's an ancient eagle's head. And there's other evidence that's right in front of your faces that you don't even realize. Like if you look at ancient people's bones, the ones they call them Neanderthal bones, they actually aren't. Most people don't know this, that the bone that's right here on your brow never stops growing. So if you were to live hundreds of years, your bones would actually end up looking like that, because this would start to protrude more. Not only that, their bones were more fit and stronger. Their wisdom teeth fit together perfectly. Why do our wisdom teeth not fit together? What are they for? It's because our growth has been stunted, because our atmosphere is completely different than what it was before the flood. The flood scarred the entire world. And that is explained of how it happened by the plate tectonics theory, which is fascinating. And check this out, because what it was is there was, okay, picture water in the sky, and then you have land, and then you have water under that land, and that's where that mist came up from. And we'll actually watch this. This is how, and this is also how we got the Messianic Ridge that shows the separation of the lands. Watch this.
We can see on our planet 25 major features that can now be systematically explained as a consequence of a global flood that erupted from subterranean chambers with an energy release exceeding the explosion of 30 trillion hydrogen bombs. This theory shows us just how rapidly major mountains form. It explains the coal, oil, and methane deposits, the rapid continental drift, and why on the ocean floor there are huge trenches, hundreds of canyons, and tens of thousands of volcanoes. This theory also explains the ice ages, and it gives the primary reason for global warming. It explains the formation of the layered strata in almost all fossils, the frozen mammoths, and major land canyons, especially the Grand Canyon. Surprisingly, it explains the origin of comets, of asteroids, and of meteorites.
According to Dr. Brown's theory, the ancient world that Noah lived in was very different from the Earth we occupy today.
Noah and other pre-flood people probably lived on one very large supercontinent with lush vegetation, inland seas, and major rivers. The mountains were smaller than today's, perhaps 6,000 feet high. Before the flood, about half the Earth's water was in interconnected chambers about 10 miles below the Earth's surface. This formed a thin spherical shell, almost a mile thick. The pressure in the subterranean chamber had been increasing for centuries because the gravity of the sun and moon produced tides in the subterranean water that lifted and lowered the Earth's massive crust twice a day. This tidal pumping added gigantic amounts of energy to the subterranean water. This increasing pressure in the subterranean water steadily stretched the crust as a balloon stretches when the pressure inside increases. Failure in the crust began as a microscopic crack that grew in both directions at almost 3 miles per second. The crack, following the path of least resistance, encircled the globe in about 2 hours. As the crack raced around the Earth, the overlying rock crust opened up like a rip in a tightly stretched claw. So the water exploded violently out of the rupture. The Bible even gives us a precise date, 600th year Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open. Then it says, and the rain fell. The fountains of water jetted supersonically into and above the atmosphere. The spray from these enormous fountains produced torrential rain such as the Earth has never experienced before or after. The supersonic fountains eroded the crumbling rock on both sides of the widening crack. This produced huge volumes of sediments that settled through the floodwaters, trapping and burying plants and animals, forming the fossil record. Eventually, the crack became so wide that the newly exposed floor of the subterranean chamber sprung upward, giving birth to the mid-oceanic ridge that wraps around the Earth like the seam of a baseball. The continental plates, with lubricating water still beneath them, slid downhill away from the rising mid-Atlantic ridge. After the massive, slowly accelerating continental plates reached speeds of approximately 40 to 50 miles per hour, they ran into resistances, and like a runaway crashing train, they compressed, crushed, buckled, and thickened, rising out of the floodwaters. This is why the major mountains are generally parallel to the oceanic ridges from which they slid. Today's major mountains were all pushed up in hours. The hydroplates, in sliding away from the mid-Atlantic ridge, opened up very deep ocean basins into which the floodwaters retreated.
So what you have is this explosion from the ground that shoots up into the sky. And this actually this is where meteors come from. It's from the flood because that eruption shot up into the sky. Now it shoots up into the sky and it breaks the seal of that water. That water that would be in the atmosphere starts pouring down as rain. So you got water coming up from the ground and you got water coming down from the sky. And what happens is it shoots up, and those fragments of the Earth from that huge explosion is where meteors come by. And what it does is it circles back around, and they've proven this, that there's water and material from the Earth on meteors. Like it came from the Earth. It did come from the Earth. It was from the flood. So you have this huge explosion and everything's covered. And not only that, this is where it gets really interesting. Did you know that you can take like raw material like sediments and stuff like that, and if you took all that vegetation and you crushed it and then did heat, you can create oil within a lab within minutes, and coal in a lab for minutes. So all that vegetation and all the stuff from the ancient world got mixed around from the flood. Everything settled down and crushed all that stuff. It crushed all that stuff, and it created that layer of oil that we have. So when you're fueling up your car to drive around, you're actually fueling it with the remains of the ancient world. Okay, this is where it starts getting really fascinating. All right, check out this verse in Daniel 10. It says, "While I was lying in bed, this is what I dreamed. I saw a large tree in the middle of the earth. The tree grew tall and strong, reaching high into the heavens for all the world to see. It had fresh green leaves, and it was loaded with fruit for all to eat, the wild animals And then as I lay there dreaming, I saw a message. O Holy One, coming down from heaven, the messenger shouted, cut down the tree and lop off its branches, shake off its leaves and scatter its fruits, chase the wild animals away, but leave the stump and the roots in the ground, bound with a band of iron and bronze. And then, this is out of the book of Enoch. In those days, the word of God came to me and said, Noah, behold, thou Lot was ascended to me, the void of thy crime, Lot, behold, in the upright. Now then shall the angels labor at the trees, but when they proceed to this, I will put my hand upon it and preserve it. Labor at the trees. How about cut down the trees, exactly like in Daniel? Okay, let's start thinking about taking this at face value, talking about a tree that you could see from the entire earth, right? And then it says the angels came down and they cut it down, but it left the stump. Now, if the tree was that big, think about, how do you make stone? You mix like straw and clay and wood and mud and you let it set, right? Well, think about the mixture of what a flood would do to the entire world. It would make this mixture that if it landed on something, it's going to turn it to stone, because that's how stone's made. Well, what would a giant tree stump look like that was stone? How about exactly like this? Okay, now check this out at the petrified forest. These ancient trees that they're calling trees are petrified because they're so old. But actually, those aren't trees. Those are tree limbs, because the tree stumps are in the background. That is angels' swords cutting these trees down. And these kind of formations are found not just in one or two spots, but all over the world. So if angels cut down those trees, I know, I would ask, where's the rest of the tree? Well, I have a theory about this. Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you, right? And he was a carpenter. That's interesting. Another interesting thing about the pre-flood world, it talks about in Genesis 6, it talks about these angels who came down from heaven, started having sex with women, and their kids would be these humongous giants. But if you read the book of Enoch, that was a book that was taken out of the Bible 500 years after Jesus, and you can still find them in complete Ethiopian books, and it's quoted throughout the Bible. But it goes into detail about those angels. It talks about their names, how many there were, and stuff like that. And what those angels did is they taught men how to make metal, how to make swords, how to make knives, how to read astrology, how to root cut. They taught women how to put on makeup. This is all from fallen angels' technology, but these people were evil. And but in the book of Enoch, he tells how tall some of them grew, and he did it in cubits. And I took what it said and I did the calculations of the cubits he was saying. I was like, that's like 2 to 4 miles high that these giants some of them would grow to. That's what? That's crazy. And I was like, okay, if there was something that big that died, where would the remains be? But this is when you have to actually start thinking about how this would happen. Because the only way something fossilized is if it gets buried very deep, very fast. And that's where you get like dinosaur bones and stuff like that. And dinosaurs did come off of Noah's Ark. It's just they got extinct, just like most things are getting extinct. And it also goes back to the curse at the beginning when Adam and Eve bit the apple, when he looked at the serpent and he cursed them. And it goes in, and there's some other books that are ancient that go into more detail about what happened in the garden. And God looked at the serpent and said, you will no longer have feet, hands, or wings, and you will crawl on your belly. What is a serpent that has feet, hands, and wings? That's a dragon. And he cursed it to crawl on its belly and to die. And like, you could look this up. They found Tyrannosaurus Rex's bones with the blood cells still in them. It's whew. Okay, I'm getting off subject because there's so much behind this. It's fascinating. But anyway, getting back to it. Okay, so these gigantic giants that would be this big. Where would you'd have to be able to find something on them? That's just too big. Well, you got to start thinking about how that would have gone. Now, a lot of things with all with the flood, it would wash things around, and a lot of things would get buried, and that's why we find massive graveyards of like dinosaurs and everyday animals right beside of them, and footprints of people running right beside dinosaurs. But something that big would not be buried. What would happen is it would drown. It would hit the ground, and all that, like I was saying, all that mixture of like sediments and mud would mix and fall on top of it. Now what would happen is it would fall on top of it, and then that would get turned to stone, leaving the shapes, and the internal organs, just like normal, would rot and decay and disappear. But what would be left is the actual shape, because it was too big to get buried. But even some things did get buried, because did y'all know in Ecuador there's a fossil remains of a 40-foot giant. But if something was too big to get buried, it could, like, look at this right here. This you're looking at is not bone fossil. That is a stone. That is a stone because it fell on the outside. But these giants would have also been in the same scenario of what you're looking at of this T-Rex head. And oddly enough, these shapes are also found, these interesting stone shapes are found all over the world. And it isn't just people, giant people, it's giant animals. So you have to start thinking, what was that world like before? What was our world like before the flood? With these giants and this vast vegetation and these humongous trees. Probably looked more like the movie Avatar, but the people weren't blue. They were more this color or whatever color. And there's a lot of interesting things that are right in front of everybody's faces that they're not picking up on. And I remember in one of those ancient books when Adam and Eve got kicked out of the garden, it said God closed all the animals' mouths. And that is backed up in the Bible with that story of the prophet on the donkey with the angel in the road, because it says that God opened the donkey's mouth and he talked to him. Opened his mouth. Notice that wording? Opened. That means it was closed before. Opened his mouth. And it talked. Why are we, out of all the vast crazy animals on this planet, why are we the only ones that can talk? When you look in your dog's eyes and stuff like that, or your cat's or a pig or a horse or stuff, they all have different personalities. You could see them when they smile. You could see them when they're sad. You could see them when they're ashamed. They all have personalities, and sometimes it looks like they're trying to talk to us. Why are we the only ones that can talk? Why are we the only ones that are not ran by instinct, but we are ran by choice and thought? Because we're the only ones who bit from a tree of knowledge of good and evil. And this is right in front of our faces. And also, did you know that Sodom and Gomorrah has been found? Sodom and Gomorrah, this story in the Bible that two angels came into Sodom and Gomorrah after talking to Abraham. After God and two angels talked to Abraham, the two angels went into Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot took him into his house, and then all the men saw the angels. These angels didn't have wings; they look like normal people. Which brings up the Bible verse that people be kind to strangers, because some people have entertained angels unaware. But these angels went in to Lot's house to spend the night because they went into Sodom and Gomorrah because the place was so evil. Now all the men gathered up and they wanted to have sex with them, and they thought they had a right to those men to have sex with them. And but the angels blinded everybody. They're too powerful. They got Lot, his two daughters, and his wife out, but of course she ended up getting turned to a pillar of salt because she didn't listen to him. But they got him out, and then God rained fire and brimstone down on the city and burned and killed everyone because it was so wicked. That place has been found. You can go to it. You can see the outline of the town. They have tested it, and that stuff is brimstone, ash, and limestone, and it has you can find sulfur balls still embedded all over the place, and it is the purest sulfur in the entire world. You cannot find sulfur more pure on the entire planet than right there at this one particular spot. And when you burn it, you can see that it catches on fire extremely fast, and it burns blue because the sulfur is so pure. But right here, you're looking at the real Sodom and Gomorrah. You can go there and see it, and the city is in ashes and crumbling and still has sulfur in it. So you know the story about Joseph in the Bible. His father loved him a lot, gave him a coat of many colors. His brothers became jealous, pretending they killed him, but sold him as a slave. He He went to a rich man's house. He ran the rich man's house. He was unjustly accused by the guy's wife because she wanted him, and he was thrown in prison. Then he ended up running in prison, and then he interprets a dream. He becomes second in command to Pharaoh, saves the nation because there were 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine, and he set it up to take care of them during the years of famine. That Joseph, you want to see what he looks like? Here he is. This is the real Joseph. You are looking at his face. The Egyptians called him Imhotep, but his real name from the Bible is Joseph. See, look at the comparisons. This is what the Egyptians say about Imhotep, and this is what the Bible says about Joseph. They're the same person. This is the real Joseph of the Bible. And where he lives, you can see where he built all this stuff. You can still go and see where they kept all the grain that they stored for 7 years and then sold for 7 years. The setup, the pyramid, this is where he lived. This is where his brothers came. This is where they got reunited. This is the land that he ruled.
The complex at Saqqara contains 11 massive pits, which even the Egyptians are at a loss to explain. They are not tombs, for all tombs were underground and carefully sealed, while these were accessible from the surface, and they are extremely large. But most fascinating is the fact that they are all connected by chutes. Ron believes these were the grain storage pits of the 7-year famine. As grain was removed from one pit, grain from the other pits flowed through the chutes, making the grain always accessible from one location. These are within the wall of the step pyramid complex, which has only one entrance, and it opens to a long covered passageway with small cubicles on each side, each just the right size for a person to sit with perhaps a small table. The narrow, singular entrance would have allowed only a few people to enter at a time. There was no doubt in Ron's mind that this was the main center of grain distribution on a massive scale.
As people arrived to get their grain, they lined up to enter the long corridor. Inside, they paid one of the cashiers in one of the cubicles for the grain. After payment was made, perhaps they were given a sack for grain which reflected the amount of their payment. Then they proceeded through the corridor straight to the area of the grain bins. Once there, they descended the stairway next to the storage bins, handed their sack to a worker who filled it with grain and returned it to them. Then they exited through a small door on the lower level, which led to the outside of the complex.
When the pits were first excavated, bits of grain still remained in them.
So you got the Jews there with Joseph, and then they start helping with building like the Great Pyramids and stuff like that. And if you read the ancient book of Jasher, which is also quoted in the Bible, they didn't start off as slaves. They were actually hired to do it, and then it explains in detail in the ancient book of Jasher how they were manipulated into being slaves by evil rulers after Joseph passed away. But they helped start building the pyramids, and if you're wondering how they could have done that without cranes and stuff, they didn't need cranes. The Egyptians had giants. And yes, there were giants after the flood, and this is where it gets interesting. It's very clear in the Bible about a lot of giants. David and Goliath. And then God is always constantly telling these towns to go to these certain people that are giants and wiping them all out. Like there was something wrong with the DNA. The DNA is coming from a mixture of angels and humans and creating demons. And in the book of Enoch, it explains this is where demons come from. Because before the flood with all those giants, and he cursed the angels who fell from God and turned away from God, he cursed them saying that their sons would die in war and stuff like that, and then he would kill all of mankind except for Noah and his family. But he said that because they were hybrids, they were not from heaven, they're not from earth, they were kind of both, their spirits would come out and they would become demons, like kind of cursed to be in between. Now some of them are in the pit, and God was going to throw them all in the pit, but Satan came up to God and said, I need some of them to show how corrupt man is. And so God allowed it. But, and that's why they're so scared of us, because Jesus gave us the power. What you bind on earth, you bind in heaven. What you loose on earth, you loose in heaven. That's why they want to keep their thing a secret, because you actually have power over these things. But this is where they came from. And like, it isn't just giants. You have these weird, like the oblong-shaped skull hybrid crossbreeds. There's just so much like weird demonic mixtures of the other dimension that can cross over into the physical form and create these weird things. But when they die, they become demons. But yes, the Egyptians also had giants, and that's how and it's very clear on the and it's documented for us to see it. Watch. So after their slavery, I think just about everybody knows the story of the Exodus, where God saves his people, he takes them out, and he has them follow this path, and right here in this one location at the Red Sea, there is underground, there's almost like this smooth path that goes from point A to point B right here, that if the waters were to go down, it would be a smooth, straight shot. And all over the seabed is the remains of an army covered in coral of like wheels and stuff like that. But yeah, you can actually go and follow the route and use the Bible almost like a road map going straight to the real Mount Sinai, not the one that's the tourist site. But in Saudi Arabia, it says in the Bible that God descended on Mount Sinai like a flame of fire, right? And the earth shook and it scared everybody. But surrounded in a fence with a warning in every single language in Saudi Arabia, there is a mountain, and the tip of it is black. And people have snuck up there before, and what they do is they took the rocks and smashed it and broke it open, and inside it's normal rock. It's just on the outside that this is black. And there is a very distinct line where the black ends and stops. Like it was burned. An entire top of a mountain burned. Same mountain that Moses got the Ten Commandments. And when he was getting the Ten Commandments, at the base there is this rock formation that looks like this, that has a bunch of drawings of a calf, like the golden calf that made Moses so mad, and he broke the first 10 Commandments, and kind of got God pretty mad at them too for being idiots. But on the same mountain, there is a bush, very, very old bush. Go figure, kind of like the burning bush, and it's also an almond tree. And Aaron's staff was made out of an almond tree. And in the exact locations on the same mountain are right where God told Moses to build an altar for sacrifices. And then there's a spot for where the children of Israel would build an altar for sacrifices. And it's all right there. But one of the most fascinating things right near that location is this ginormous split rock that's 4 stories tall and has water erosion all around it. The rock that Moses struck and split, and water came gushing out for everybody to drink. It's all there. It's still there. You can see this stuff. Take my word for it. Look it up yourself. Another interesting thing is Ron Wyatt also found the Ark of the Covenant. Yes, the Ark of the Covenant has been found. And what's interesting of where it was actually at will blow your mind. Okay, so Jeremiah, actually that's where my name comes from, ironically. It's the New Testament version of the name Jeremiah, which means God will rise up. But Jeremiah, I remember reading this in the Bible, and it just struck me odd because it never explained why it was actually in there. I couldn't figure it out. But Jeremiah talks about buying this one spot of land that God told him to buy, and he puts the documents of the purchase of it in a bottle and hides it away. Well, right before Israel was taken over and they were surrounded, come to find out, what Jeremiah did is he went out to that spot of land that he bought that everybody thought was worthless. he dug tunnels and he hid the Ark of the Covenant there so that it wouldn't get... I think it was Nebuchadnezzar or something like that was going to take over the city. But he hid it so the Ark of the Covenant wouldn't get taken. And it stayed there. Ironically, years later, nobody knew it was there. And that ended up being the very spot where Jesus was crucified. They found the spot and the peg in the floor. Wyatt found the peg in the floor. There was different layers, and there was a center peg and 2 side pegs of where the cross was put. And just like it said in the Bible, he saw this huge crack in the ground, and behind him was this wall, and that's where they put the sign of Jesus is King of the Jews. But he saw that there was this huge crack on the ground. Like it said, the earth shook and the ground split. They didn't realize, though, is it split right under Jesus on the cross, and his blood went down the cross into that crack, all the way down where the Ark of the Covenant was buried underneath him, and his blood dripped on top of the Ark of the Covenant. Let that sink in. It was planned from the beginning, and that is exactly what they used to do, is they sprinkle blood on the Ark for the Passover. He was the Passover lamb, and where it was hidden, and Ron and Wyatt found it. They went under there digging, found these tunnels and went under them. And one of the people that he got to help went in there first, saw it. Something scared him. He ran away, never came back. And Ron Wyatt went in there and saw the Ark of the Covenant in the chest that was open, and Jesus' blood was still on there. He tried to take pictures of it, but every time he took a picture of it, it became out blurry. Now he took samples of what he saw, this black stuff that had dripped down on top of it. He took samples of it, and he went and didn't tell them. He was in Jerusalem, so he went and he took it to some of the top scientists for analyzing it. What they found from that blood is fascinating, and he documented it. Watch.
Ron started shining his flashlight down through the rocks to see if there was anything underneath. He saw some dry, rotten timbers, and under it some dry, rotten animal skins that turned into powder when he touched it. He then saw something reflecting back, something shiny and golden. At first he thought it could be the Ark of the Covenant, but when removing the animal's skin, he saw a gold veneered table with a raised molding around the side, which consisted of an alternative pattern of a bell and a pomegranate. Ron felt sure this had to be from the first temple or the missing tabernacle furniture, and could be the original table of showbread. He then started to investigate the chamber more closely and looked around. He used his light and noticed a crack in the ceiling. Climbing closely to the rocks to the rear of the chamber, he saw a stone case right underneath the crack. It had a flat stone top which was cracked in two, and a smaller section moved to the side, creating an opening into the stone case. But the top was too close to the ceiling for him to be able to look inside it. He noticed a black substance in the crack above it, and some more of the black substance on the edge of the lid, leading into the box. The crack in the ceiling was directly above the cracked part of the lid, where it was open, and some of the black substance had to have fallen into the case. It was at this time, as Ron recalls, as the instant realization of what had happened here dawned on him, that he passed out. When he realized that the crack in the ceiling was the end of the crack extending from the crosshole found in the elevated platform many feet above him, and the black substance was blood that had fallen through the crack and into the stone case, he knew the Ark was in the stone case. But the most overwhelming realization was that Christ's blood had actually fallen on the mercy seat on the Ark of the Covenant. Ron was passed out for some time. He later came back to the cave and managed to confirm that it really was the Ark of the Covenant. He informed the Israeli government of the discovery, but was told to keep it quiet. But Ron could not stay silent for long. Ron visited the chamber several times and reported that several items were in there in addition to the Ark of the Covenant in the stone case, the 7-branch candlestick holder with their lamps from the original sanctuary, the golden altar of incense, the table of showbread, a golden censer, an ephod, a mitra with an ivory pomegranate on the tip, a brass shekel weight, oil lamps and a brass ring, and a very large sword. In the back of the ark was a small open cubicle which still contains the book of the law, presumably the one Moses himself wrote. To his understanding, the book of Genesis was not there. It amazed Ron that these scrolls written on animal skins were still in perfect condition. He then began to realize that the ark had to have been taken into this chamber somehow. It couldn't be where he entered because he had cut through a stone to get in. Removing some of the stones, he found a larger entrance going south towards Zedekiah's cave on the other side of the road, where the cherubim had been found. This tunnel was, however, blocked with many large rocks, and Ron had no way of moving them out of the tunnel from where he entered. Ron had a laboratory in Israel analyze the blood remains he had found in the crack and on the mercy seat of the ark. The results shocked them beyond anything.
First of all, in this analysis, I took the blood into a laboratory in Israel. I asked one of the people I work with in antiquities, where is a good laboratory that does reliable work? And they said, such and such, such and such. I took it. I just said, please examine this blood and tell me what you can tell me about it. All right? They said, well, look, we're going to reconstitute it. We're going to put it in normal saline and keep it at body temperature for 72 hours with gentle swirling. All right, that's their business. That's great. I said, now I want to be there when you check it out. They said, fine. So I was back. They checked it out. I said, now, they said it's human blood. We can tell that. They did whatever tests they need to do. And then I said, take some of the white blood cells and put them in a growth medium and keep them at body temperature for 48 hours. And they said, well, that'll do no good because it's dead blood. I said, would you please do that for me? They said, okay, we'll do it. So anyway, I said, I want to be there when you take it out and examine it. So I was back there. They took it out, examined it under a microscope, and the one technician called the other one over there, and then they called the boss over there, and they were talking Hebrew a mile a minute there for a little bit, and they looked at me and they said, Mr. Wyatt, this human blood only has 24 chromosomes in it. Everybody else has 46. You see, 23 from your mother, 23 from your father, 22 autosomes from your mother, 22 autosomes from your father. You get an X from your mother, you may get an X or a Y from your father, all right? This blood had 23 chromosomes from the mother's side, one Y chromosome only. You see, the child could not have developed if they hadn't had the autosomes from the mother. So all of his physical characteristics were determined by his mother's side of the family, her autosomes. His maleness was determined by this one Y that came from the source, not a human male. Then they said, this blood is alive. And then they said, whose blood is this? I said, it's the blood of your Messiah.
So where is the Ark of the Covenant right now, if it's been found? Well, right now it's under lock and key, and it's being guarded because they're waiting until the temple is rebuilt, which it has already started being rebuilt. Which is odd because, you know, in the book of Revelation, there's things like the trumpets will sound, the seals will be broken, the bowls will be poured out. That's odd that America's president is named Donald Trump. It's a weird play on words. Kind of makes the hair on your neck stand up, doesn't it? And one of the most fascinating subjects ever is the Shroud of Turin, the actual cloth that Jesus was wrapped in after he was crucified. And what makes this so fascinating is the image that's on it. And it took what, hundreds of years before cameras were invented, and what comes to find out is the Shroud of Turin is actually a negative of a person who was beaten brutally, and they can't even reproduce. They don't know how, and they can't reproduce this kind of image anywhere. There's only one on the planet, because the only way this image was made is there had to be a burst of light and heat in an instant, which created this image on this cloth. And it has been scrutinized by science. And you could go, and the story of the Shroud of Turin is fascinating. But yeah, the real image of this person, and they took samples, and the blood on it's real blood. This is a real image that they cannot reproduce today. This is the real cloth that Jesus was wrapped in. They can even make 3D images of him. But what makes it even more fascinating is that movie, Heaven is Real, that boy who was in the hospital. I think he died for a little bit and then he came back, but he went to heaven. He met Jesus. He met his sister who was a miscarriage in heaven. He came back and he told his parents about it, and they kept showing him pictures of Jesus, and he was like, no, that's not him, that's not him. And there's this 8-year-old girl who would have visions of Jesus, and I don't want to say her name because I'll mispronounce it. I'm just going to put it up. I follow her on Instagram and stuff like that. And a talented artist. But when she was 8 years old, she kept having these visions and would do paintings of like heaven and stuff like that. But she did a painting of Jesus. And when that boy saw her on TV and saw the image that she painted of Jesus, she says, "That's him, Daddy. That's Jesus." And what's interesting about this painting that this girl did of Jesus when she was 8 years old from a vision she saw has an over 90% accuracy with the Shroud of Turin when they put it side by side. And I'm not even scratching the surface of half the stuff that you can research and do. And I could talk about each one of these subjects for like ever. But I just wanted to have something quick and together so people could see it in one spot. And also I did it for me so I could have it in one spot. Yeah, it says in the Bible that every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. I already confess. I have no problems calling Jesus my hero because he actually is. And my knee already bows. And when the King returns, I will be one of the first ones to kneel and bow because I love him. I'm crazy about him. But yeah, I just want to open your mind and start looking at the world differently. It's a lot more stranger and fascinating than most people think it is. But I'm going to leave y'all with these images put in order so that if somebody ever wants to just quickly go to it and just see the images side by side, strengthen your faith, and do some research. And you guys have an awesome day.